we don't communicate like this, so why would you focus on separate words? We communicate in expressions, and if you start focusing on expressions, you're going to be able to speak English without always thinking what to say next. Part of the reason you keep looking for the perfect word to use when you speak English is because you haven't automatized the expressions and phrases so they can come out automatically. Would you expect different results from using the same strategies that we all picked up in school? Things like studying words separately from a random list of words that the teacher gives us, not the words that we choose because we find them useful. Translating word by word from your first language, which is one of the biggest reasons people make so many mistakes when they speak English, and not prioritizing your listening skills above everything else you do about your English fluency. In today's video, we're going to find out more about how prioritizing my listening skills, active listening, which is basically learning grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation through listening to English, has helped me learn to speak English fluently, naturally, make much fewer mistakes, and have a clearer pronunciation, and how focusing on the right strategies, you can do this too. And it's understandable if you make at least one of these mistakes I listed, because we all learn English in school. But the thing is, they're all methods that just help us study English as a subject and keep us safe. In school, we get the illusion that English is like math, so that there is only one answer to one question, there's only one translation to one word, which couldn't be further from the truth. And many struggling English students make many mistakes, and there is no problem with making mistakes. I always encourage my students to keep making mistakes, keep taking the courage and speak, because as long as you get feedback, constructive feedback on your mistakes, you will learn how to say something better. But most people make most of their mistakes because they translate word by word from their first language due to not actively listening to real English content. Why is it dangerous if you really want to speak English fluently without always thinking about the next word? It's actually through actively listening to the same grammar structures, the same key vocabulary, the same ways to pronounce different sounds, and then practicing and reviewing those grammar structures and vocabulary in real context, and then using those grammar structures in conversations that will help you speak English more fluently, naturally, and confidently. I'm sure whatever your level, you can already say things like, "What's your name?" or "Where do you come from?" You're not thinking about each word in these sentences. You can pretty confidently say them, I presume, right? Why? Mostly because you've heard, seen, and used these sentences as they are without going into the analysis of why is it do and why is it you. You've just repeatedly heard these sentences, probably used them a few times as well. You even know how to answer these questions because you've seen those situations so many times. You've repeatedly heard them in context. This is something we recently talked with my TikTok followers on one of the lives that I had. Think of speaking English in front of other people like a theater play, like the performance. Speaking English is eventually a kind of performance, just like playing the piano, the guitar, dancing, or putting up a show. What leads to the success of a theater performance? The actors and everyone else who's responsible for something on the stage have practiced the performance consistently over time, probably over months. They don't just start randomly acting in front of the audience without any preparation. Like, you wouldn't expect to just randomly speak about things that you've never practiced before when it comes to English. Unfortunately, there are many struggling English students who are making an attempt to speak about things that they've never practiced before because they expect to speak English freely and spontaneously without actually putting in the effort. The good thing is, it's not only speaking that actually helps you speak English better, which is where a lot of struggling English students miss out on these incredible opportunities that active listening can offer to them. They speak for the sake of speaking, expecting to do everything spontaneously, trying to express themselves like they would in their first language. But again, they've had decades of practice of their first language. So of course they can improvise and speak freely without always thinking. The same wouldn't happen for years when it comes to speaking English fluently. And it's not them, it's how our brain is naturally learning a second language. This is where also reading books is an incredibly great way to improve your grammar and have a wider range of vocabulary as well. This is something I used to do all the time, even at a very early stage of my English learning. But overusing books actually leads to a lot of issues. How can someone expect to understand fast English speakers or have clear pronunciation if they never actually heard those words from fast English speakers, or how those words are pronounced, especially when there are words around them, just by learning from textbooks and reading books? Active listening is ultimately what contributed to 70% of the success I had with learning English. And I talk more about this in this video. I teach the same thing to my students. My classes are extremely listening and conversation based. But one thing that really helped me speak English naturally was that I wasn't just randomly listening. I was actively listening. So I wanted to dedicate more time in this video to help you understand what active listening is, because I'm not sure if you've heard what it actually is, because most struggling English students have no idea. It's not their fault. Very few teachers in school, in courses as well, teach how to listen to English better. In most of the classrooms, listening is used as a way to test your abilities without ever teaching you how to listen. So most teachers are not teaching you to listen. They are testing you on your listening. One of the reasons my students gain confidence in speaking English really fast and they can communicate effectively, some of them even say they think in English, is because we put so much emphasis on listening in my fluency program, the Proficiency Fortress. And if you want to find out more about how active listening works, how you could also learn grammar and vocabulary through listening, you can sign up for my new course, Ears Wide Open, through the first link in the description below, which will not only help you understand fast English speakers of all kinds of accents, but will also help you learn to speak English more fluently and confidently, use better vocabulary, better grammar, exactly the way I did it. Active listening is a complex process, and this is probably why so many struggling English students and teachers, not necessarily struggling, don't give too much importance to it in their learning program. When we listen to sounds, they immediately disappear, and if we get distracted, we are looking at a bird flying high in the sky, we might miss a lot of words and then have no idea what the speaker was talking about. And let's not forget that English isn't a phonetic language, and we can't learn a word just by reading it and knowing how it's spelled. We also need to know how a word is pronounced, is spoken, especially with other words around it. First of all, the reason so many struggling English students probably don't listen to as much English as they should is because they can't recognize the sounds that people are using. Again, it's not their fault. Most traditional English courses never teach you the different sounds of English and how to hear them when it comes to actively listening to a podcast or an interview. But you need to make sure you know the difference between words like pan, pen, and pun, or what we've recently seen with one of my Spanish-speaking students from Mexico, the difference between bus and bus. The biggest challenge for me back in the days when I was learning English was that there is no space when we listen to English. And you don't know where the word starts, where the word ends, and where the next word starts. So the next thing I help my students learn at our listening workshops and in our recorded trainings as well that they have access to 24/7 is how to recognize words in a stream of speech, like in the following sentence.
I'll tell you at the end how you can get in the room. I'll tell you at the end how you can get in the room. I'll tell you at the end how you can get in the room. I'll tell you at the end how you can get in the room. I'll tell you at the end how you can get in the room.
So there's this first two words, you act, which if you listen to it quite carefully, and I talk more about this in one of the first modules in the Ears Wide Open course as well, don't forget to check out the link, where there is a little w sound in between you and at, right? The words you, at wouldn't be pronounced with a w, but when you pronounce them next to each other, it's going to become you at. And if you don't know this rule, you only hear these words next to each other, you probably have no idea what they said. The same goes for get in, which is another feature of connected speech, which is important for you to understand fast English, where the last consonant of a word is going to roll into the beginning of a word that starts with a vowel. So instead of saying get in, it's going to become get in. The other thing a lot of struggling English students may not realize is what I started this video with. We don't speak in words. We speak in expressions and phrases and sentences. Another thing a lot of struggling English students don't realize when it comes to improving their fluency through the power of listening is that we don't communicate in words. I don't communicate like this to my friends. Do you? So we need to train our ears to understand phrases, expressions, and sentences because we don't speak in words like in the previous sentence. I'll tell you, or get in the room. If you hesitate a lot when you speak because you're always looking for the perfect word to use next, you're thinking about the preposition or the verb to use. When you're learning English through phrases and expressions and sentences the way we do in our classes, you won't have the same problem because you'll know what word comes next automatically. You have automatized those expressions through actively listening to those expressions multiple times over time and have practice with some of the most powerful activities that I share. Some of them you can find out more about in this video, which will give you that confidence you need, because when we don't hesitate, we can automatically say things. We feel so much more confident about our English. Let's say you're learning the expression remind me of, which is something a lot of especially Latinate language speakers, Spanish speakers, or Italian speakers struggle with because they don't have this distinction between remember and remind. But when you've seen how it's used in a lot of different sentences in real context, things like the smell of tea reminds me of my grandma's house. That photo reminds me of the days I spent going to cafes with my friends. When you see multiple examples of the same vocabulary or the same grammar structure that you want to focus on, that you want to get better at saying, communicating, you will see how much more automatically they will come out once you've done the right practice. Of course, understanding the 44 sounds of English, recognizing the words in an expression that people say, and then being able to speak and say all of these expressions automatically takes time. But with repetition and the right kind of activities that help you pay close attention to the grammar, the prepositions, the verbs, you will work on automatizing the language you're using, which will eventually help you speak English so much more naturally, walk into any conversation knowing what to say and feeling confident about your English. One of the many activities that I use with my students that really help them understand fast English and then get better at using the vocabulary and the grammar structures without making mistakes is a kind of dictation exercise, but with a twist, and you can find out more about this in an earlier video where I shared the entire process, and you could also practice with me in that video. But today I'm gonna share with you another one, which is a gap filling activity, but instead of reading the sentence with the gap, you would actually hear the sentence with a gap, and you would have to think what word to put into that gap. Instead of leaving a gap, I could just simply say bang where that missing word is. This is done after hearing and seeing the same grammar structures, the same expressions that we are practicing with my students, but always in real context. We don't just look at grammar as if like the past continuous and the past perfect. We always give it a context. For example, when we're learning the past continuous and the past perfect, we're giving it the context of storytelling. How could we use these grammar structures in real life conversation? So I might say sentences like, I bang calling my friend for help when they attacked me. And you could say, I was calling my friend to help when they attacked me. Or I had bang waiting for them for an hour, but no one showed up. And you could say, I had been waiting for them for half an hour, but no one showed up. Activities like this don't just help you understand more about how the grammar is used, but they will also train you to make much fewer mistakes, as you would be automatizing the expressions without even thinking what is the next word to use, because you've seen those structures over and over again. We in my courses gradually move away from listening to, reading, and looking at a lot of examples in context and talking about them into more review activities that help my students use those structures without thinking until we reach a level where we can actually start speaking and using those expressions. And we always do communication practice in two different ways. We have specific speaking booster classes where my students learn how to put those sentences together, how to have and use a wide variety of vocabulary to express themselves. And we have conversation circles where they have an activity to solve, and that's where they are encouraged to actually use English spontaneously, which they can because they have used the structures so many times through active listening, reviewing, and speaking practice. Once you understand the incredible importance listening, active listening plays in so many aspects of your English fluency, clear pronunciation, speaking without making too many mistakes, speaking naturally and automatically, you'll be making so much more progress. And if you still have any questions about what exactly I did to improve my fluency, I know this whole idea of learning to speak English through listening and speaking might sound like a completely new idea. Make sure you hit the comment section with your questions or just send me an email. You will find my details right below in the description. And let me know what you think about the video. What are your biggest takeaways from it? And like always, thank you so much for hanging out here, and just keep listening so you can keep speaking.